I was going to use a different word, but they act together.
I agree with your comment in terms of, that Latin America needs to should I say, I can say what you didn't want to say. No, I'm not gonna say. Welcome everybody to another podcast. We're back here with Lucho to talk about a few really interesting things. So today we're gonna go over a very fundamental question that investors and the world is having today is, where are we getting the future copper, lithium, nickel, and all these metals that we're gonna need? So we're gonna go over that in a bit of detail, and we're gonna also talk about a few deals, super interesting deals that have happened in lithium. So make sure you stay until the end so you can hear our thoughts on the Lithium Americas and Allkem and a few other things that have happened. Hi Lucho, how are you?
Hey Paula, how are you?
I'm good. So we don't have the sunset today because you're on the road.
I am. I'm actually in Bolivia, which is my home country, but I'm here visiting on some personal stuff, but also looking at some opportunities. So should be interesting to be here for a couple of days.
Nice. So we've been having in recent days, and this year has been super kind of full on in terms of talking about the future supply. So there's all these bulls saying that we don't have enough, which I think we are on that side. I don't think we have enough. I mean, today we have, but we're not going to have enough as we go forward, especially towards 2030 and beyond.
No, so Paula, I mean, it would be great to hear from our listeners if they want us to talk about something specific, right? I mean, coming into this week, there's been deals going on, etc. But I'm not sure whether we had something specific, something hot to talk about. And so that's why we came up with, why don't we talk about the different countries and just say some snippets about each one of them, and that's what I'm going to do now. But let's give our listeners the opportunity to ask some questions, and let us know if they want to hear about a specific country, commodity, size, range, well, whatever, and we'll do our best. So let me just talk about some of the countries now.
Yeah, exactly. Let us know in the comments, and we'll use this for a future episode.
I mean, I guess the whole thing came up. We've been talking about copper and the deals that are going on there, and we've talked about lithium and what's going on there. And the other day I came across an article. Honestly, I can't remember which one it was, but it was talking about, primary copper smelting capacity in China growing at a unprecedented pace. And it was talking about basically something like 12 million tons of copper concentrates needed to make up for the new smelting capacity, which, of course that's a huge amount of concentrates, right?
Yeah.
And where's that going to come from? I mean, we've talked about deals and the need for copper, and why, for example, on copper, they're going for consolidation rather than, exploration and, the project risk, etc. But where is it going to come from? And of course, I mean, we cover Latin America. We see people scrambling all over. So I figured it would be a good idea to sort of do a quick recap of some of the countries that we've talked about in the previous podcast and that we know so well. I mean, you've got Chile, where you've got a government that is going for higher taxes, and there's proposals for higher taxes. Of course, there was the whole lithium strategy, nationalization and not nationalization. We actually talked for an hour in our podcast just about that, whether it was or not. But today I was reading an article from the New York Times, right? I mean, the New York Times. And it's an article from, I think, about a week and a half ago, but it actually talked about the chain and the supply chain and where things are coming from, and actually mentioned Chile nationalizing lithium. I was like, oh my God, they're still getting it wrong, right? And we said it's not a nationalization, but I mean, it adds, some kind of cloud there. In Peru, we're fairly calm now, from the disruptions that we had at the end of the year and the beginning of this year. But the social political issues are far from over, right? I mean, there's a calm, but is that the calm that's going to stay on for the next 3 years that the government lasts? Or is it the calm before the storm, or a new storm, right? Or a worse storm? And that's just not conducive for billion-dollar developments, okay? Ecuador, I mean, is Lasso going to continue or not? I've got a lot of experience in Ecuador. I'm a director of a company that has a project there. We've always said since Lasso came on that if there's a time to do, to build a project, it's now. And actually, this is the project that of the company Atico that I'm a director of, is one of the few projects that have the government support. But is he going to stay on, and what are the changes that are coming? I mean, there are already changes in terms of community approvals and stuff like that, things that weren't there a couple of years ago. Colombia, what's next over there? I mean, no one really knows what Petro wants to do, what the people are going to do. I mean, I remember 10 years ago there were dozens of juniors flocking into Colombia, and all of that disappeared pretty much overnight because of the things that have been happening over the last few years. And in Mexico, you've got AMLO just do I nationalize? Do I do more taxes? Do I give permits? Do I not give permits? I mean, it's very much up in the air. I think it was last week. I mean, there's a pseudo nationalization of one of the main railroads, which is owned by the same group that own the La Rea group that owns Southern Copper, right? You've got Brazil, you've got Argentina. I mean, we could go on, but where's this going to come from? I mean, you've got a lot of activity in Africa, particularly from the Chinese looking for stuff. I mean, everyone's looking for stuff everywhere. Okay, Latin America needs to get their act together. I was going to use a different word, but their act together, so that it can remain competitive and attract the dollars, because this concern about where the supply is going to come from is not only from the Chinese. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the battery metals and what Australia is going to do and what Europe's going to do, what the US is doing to be less reliant on China, particularly. Everyone's going to scramble, and they're not going to care where they're going, right? I mean, and I think that's demonstrated already. They are going to take political risk. They are going to take social risk. And Latin America needs to be prepared for that. And then the next question is, mega projects versus the smaller projects. So, I don't know, maybe I'll stop there for a second.
I think I just wanted to touch on a bit on a couple of these countries. So I think Chile on one side and Mexico on the other side, I think for now, because of the recent activities, are kind of destroying a lot of the things that they've built so well. You go back to looking at what Mexico did, over so many years. There's a bunch of juniors working there. There's a lot of activity, and the recent changes are just so fundamentally changing the contract, the social contract, if you want to call it that, between the government, the state, and new entrants. So I think that's going to have a big impact. I read some comments from Ross Beatty, who was a client of ours years ago, and he's such a he was to me, he was a very big inspiration of seeing what is possible when you're really very clever on how you strategize. And he was saying he was having not harsh, because he's usually very, like, he can be harsh in private, but publicly he's always super polite. But he was saying, like, you know, this is gonna be really bad for, but I may put it in the comments. But you know, when you have these really big voices that are starting to talk about, it's not just the media, it's someone who's so relevant, who's, you know, coming out and saying, you know, this is changing things fundamentally. So on the bright side, what we can say about Mexico is this guy AMLO, his term is due to finish in 2024, and in Mexico you only get one term, so he's gonna be on his way out soon. So I agree with your comment in terms of, you know, that Latin America needs to should I say, I can say what you didn't want to say. No, I'm not gonna say. I think they really need to figure out where to go, especially, I think I read another statistic somewhere that about 50% of copper the copper reserves are in Latin America, which is, you know, obviously you have the rest of it's the other 50, but the other 50 is more, you know, diverse. And you have from Panama to the end of the Andes at, you know, southern Chile and Argentina, that's considered 50% of the reserve. So that's super meaningful.
Just to finish off, I mean, because you make the comments, right? And really the political scene, if we talk about AMLO, I mean, we can talk about Lasso, we can talk about Petro, we can talk about Boric. Yeah, I mean, it's the same in every case, right? I mean, the government comes in and they want an immediate change, and obviously, I mean, they see higher prices and they see what mining is generating for the state, and they want a bigger piece because, you know, they want to try to hit the ground running, and they want to make a big bang right off the bat, and it doesn't work that way with mining. I mean, that's a long-term thing, right? I mean, you know, unfortunately, politicians are politicians, right? I mean, you know, boys will be boys, kind of thing. And in the end, you know, when we talk about a project, I mean, most of Latin America is fairly well known. The projects are well known, they're well defined, the budgets are there, and it's fairly clear what needs to happen for these projects to develop, right? You know, we talked a little bit about Peru in the past. We obviously talked about Chile and lithium, but we talked about Peru and copper. You know, who's going to commit $2, $3, $4 billion today to build something that's going to take, you know, 5 or 6 years to build, right? Mm-hmm. But even more important, I mean, who's going to commit to get into the, you know, early exploration or the exploration that needs to happen for these projects to be found, and look 10 years down the line? If today the government is saying they're going to take 50% of your revenue, and you don't even, you know, you don't even have a revenue to think about, you've got to spend, you know, tens of millions of dollars in exploration. You know, I'm in Bolivia, right? You know, Bolivia is obviously historically a mining country, but you don't have the kind of projects that you have in Chile, Peru, etc. Always ask myself, well, why not? You know, I'm in the last 3-4 weeks, I've actually heard, and I'm looking at, you know, nickel in Bolivia, which you've never heard of. I mean, you've heard, you know, about nickel in Colombia, nickel in Brazil, but no nickel in Bolivia, and about copper in Bolivia, and, you know, potentially fairly big scale. Okay, too early to tell, because, I mean, in that sense, Bolivia is a bit of an elephant country, but everyone's scared about Bolivia. I'm Bolivian, I'm scared about Bolivia. Okay, you know, and it's because you really don't know where the government's going to go. Well, something is very clear. I mean, you know, Bolivia is sitting on huge lithium reserves. It's sitting in huge iron ore reserves. It was sitting on huge gas reserves, and hasn't been able to exploit any of those. You know, and the government does need the revenue now more than ever, and has realized that revenue is not going to come overnight. whether the Bolivian government is going to do something about it, that's different. That the important thing is that if Bolivia gets their act together and the Bolivian miners, can start looking long term, there's something big to be done here, right? The same thing that was done in Peru before and Chile before. And I mean, if Bolivia becomes a bit of a darling of the mining future, Peruvians need to start thinking, and Chileans need to start thinking, what's going on in this world. And hopefully you get a collective, sense of, let's do something to attract these dollars over the long term. But that's a very big challenge.
Yeah, and I'd say for Bolivia, it's a multi-decade endeavor because they've destroyed any interest for so many years. I remember talking about this was probably like 15 years ago. We were reviewing a project I can't remember exactly what area, but it was in Bolivia, and so we got into a little bit of the local. I haven't done much work there, but after that things got like much worse, and after that it was like no one even wanted to talk about it. So we haven't done anything else since. So I think well, I agree. I think in general is these countries need to really sort of moderate their expectations. I think there's a lot of, especially when you have leftist governments, that they think like, yeah, we can just come out and say, we're going to grab this and this and this, and the companies are going to be fine with it. No, they won't. They will go elsewhere. That's just the way it is.
Because there's alternatives.
Yeah.
I mean, there are alternatives, but it is the right moment to plan for the long term.
It is now. It is now.
It's now, and it's government to government, right? I mean, it's no longer just the majors that are looking for strategically placing themselves. I mean, the US, Australia, the European Union are having having discussions among them in the G7 meetings. They talked about what they're going to do to protect themselves against China and the upcoming climate change. I mean, they're not talking about rain. They're talking about sustainability in terms of continuing their industrialization and having the critical metals to be able to support that transition into their efforts of climate change, because today they don't. I mean, the US doesn't have the lithium. It doesn't have the lithium, it doesn't have the cobalt. I mean, it doesn't have a number of the critical metals, right? Most of them are in the hands of China. So, which takes us to maybe this is a good segue to the transactions that we wanted to talk about, right? And take a look at that. I mean, you're going to see, and you had mentioned this, I mean, an increase in M&A activity, that's for sure. But what are going to be the drivers? And I don't know. I mean, which deals do you want to talk about first?
So we can, and we'll put this chart in the when we post this. Just as a general comment to give before we start, the Financial Review issued this chart that shows is the value of M&As involving ASX listed miners only. So this doesn't include TSX and other exchanges. But the scale of these is just mind blowing. And I've been saying that this is going to be a record year. I don't know. It hasn't finished, so it could change because some of the things may not be completed, but it's just going to be, because the consolidation is just needed at this stage. Like this sort of no other way that it can go, and that's why what we're seeing. I think we can start with the demerger of Lithium Americas, because I think that touches on this attempt of okay, let's get local, but let's also keep an eye on these other jurisdictions that we still need, but let's have a local. So I think that's an interesting, because I think in normal times that transaction probably wouldn't have happened, or would have happened later. And now we're seeing it happen now before I thought.
Well, I think that split, right? I mean, it has a lot. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, Lithium Americas started off with a project in Cauchari in Argentina, right? Later on, merges with, who was it? And basically, acquires, inherits, the project in the States. Yeah. You've got very different jurisdictions, different kind of operations, etc. Lithium Americas had POSCO in with Cauchari for some time. Now it has Ganfeng as a partner. The U.S. was moving, the Nevada project was moving on its own. Now comes GM with a big transaction. I mean, that was fantastic. I know the Lithium America guys for a long time, and we, more than 10 years ago, we were talking about how, Tesla was going to be the first one. Tesla was not the first one. Okay, Tesla did some deals, but I mean, really, the offtake contracts that Tesla did were marketing for Tesla and for the junior, but really they weren't their weight in paper. I mean, seriously, they didn't advance projects. Okay, they just promoted projects. But when someone like a GM comes in,
I have a theory of that. That could be. Go on.
And you've got, when that happens, there's a fundamental shift in where things are going, right? It's the end user that's coming in and supporting the development of projects from a very early stage. I mean, they are acting as the equity finance for a project, where typically you to develop a project, you basically go to a project finance bank and you basically say, how much can you lend me? And the bank throws a number that's usually around 60% of the capex. And after a whole bunch of discussions, you go out and raise the balance on equity, right? Mm-hmm. From different investors, funds, etc. I mean, here you've got an end user basically coming in and throwing a lot of cash upfront to develop a project, and that just changes the dynamics. Okay, I mean, I can imagine how bad project finance bankers feel right now, because I've been a project finance banker, and I would feel really bad that I finally have competition. And it's natural. I mean, today you see those bankers, and you basically take a look at what's happening in the States. Okay, and as a banker, or as an M&A banker, right? You take a look at the States and the interest that the States has, and the political issues around China-US relations, and China rest of the world relations, and Russia rest of the world relations, etc. And it doesn't take a genius to sort of say, hey, you might want to separate the US portion, because it's got its own life now, and it's going to have a different kind of following from different types of investors, potential investors with a lot of money, that are going to want that pure exposure. Okay? Yeah. And in Argentina, you've got a Chinese exposure, which is perfect, because they come with the cash, and they're committed, and they're long term. And as far as Lithium Americas is concerned, I mean, their objective is to bring these projects into production and grab every lithium wave that they can for the next 20 or 30 years of that mine life. You really don't care where the money's coming from, right? As long as you've got the money, you build it and you can sell it, that's what you care about. So I mean, I think it's brilliant, you know. And I can definitely see that differentiation. And I think there's a lot to say about going to those investors that are going to be flocking into, you know, the new Lithium Americas or the US focused Lithium America, and knocking on their doorstep and saying, hey, you know, I've got early exploration stuff in the US, and they're going to fund it too, because there's not enough projects there. So, you know, I very much like that deal. And I think it gives them a lot of optionality. It gives the Lithium America shareholder optionality on both sides, and it gives both of the companies optionality in terms of their own growth patterns. You know, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, we like it. We've been holding that stock for a while, and we like it. But what I was going to was that I think in a pre-pandemic world, this wouldn't have happened. At least not so soon. I think the deglobalization that we're seeing is sort of perfectly reflected in this transaction because of all the things that you've explained. So there's going to be people that would never invest in Argentina, and by separating these entities or not wanting to have exposure to Argentina, which they are wrong, at least in lithium, but you know, even if they're wrong in my view, they still believe what they believe, and that's fine. So with this separation, they have a direct vehicle with all these you know, local sentiment, and you know, the Americans want to invest in American companies, and that's sort of increasing, and that's why Mexicans want their own stuff. So it's all sort of going back inward and starting to look at their own, what do we have, how can we build more on what we have locally, and that movement, like it's like the whole expansion has gone inward. So now everybody's looking inward, and deals like this, I think we're gonna see lots more of these things. You know, companies that have the capability of having more local, especially in countries like the USA. If you go back 5 or 6 years, companies with North American, like not North American, US based assets were not that many. Like, of course there were, but now you see, even on the ASX, you see a lot of companies having projects over there, and that was not that common not that long ago. So I think that that's my favorite thing about this transaction, that it's reflecting this kind of cosmovision, if you want to, this sort of attitude that is changing in the world, that people want to have more local control, more local assets. And I think that's a perfect reflection, and we're gonna see. I think there's going to be more value for shareholders, definitely. The attitude of having I mean, they could have decided, oh, we're gonna sell I mean, it could still happen, but instead of selling the Argentinian side, just splitting, I think is much better for shareholders, and it should be you know, a better deal long term. So the next one, the Allkem, the merger between Allkem and Livent. So this is interesting because it's kind of going the opposite way. So this one is merging assets in Argentina, some in Australia. What do you want to say about that merger?
Well, I mean, I think when it's about the big guys, it becomes, you know, a clash of the titans kind of thing. They're going for size, they're going for consolidation, right? I mean, Lithium Americas, you know, because of their market cap, is no longer a junior company, right? But to a degree, I mean, it still is, because I mean, it's just
doesn't have revenue. Doesn't have revenue, yeah.
So exactly, but you know, I mean, you know, it's close enough, and it's done some it's done so much on the corporate strategy side that it cannot be considered a junior, right? I mean, it's got 2 advanced projects. Yeah, I mean, it's done way too much to be considered a junior. But that, I think they, they're looking to see how they, go into the big space. And they've chosen a different path, but I think it's a path that's going to generate a lot of value for the shareholders. And they've already generated a lot of value for the shareholders. Okay, I mean, the shareholders that got into Lithium Americas early on are basically seriously walking all the way to the bank every day that these guys do a new type of transaction. So, but with the big guys, you have to grow. And I think they, it's a different mentality, I mean, and we talked about it when we were talking one of our podcasts, one of our last podcasts, not the lithium one, but the one after, where we touched on again on Chile and what Albemarle was going to do, and what Albemarle was trying to do with an acquisition, and what we felt that they should do in Chile, right? I mean, you've got to look to grow. This wave of the interest in lithium and cobalt and nickel and copper, because of them becoming battery metals, critical metals, call them whatever you want, right? That's not going to go away. And there still is a lot of money out there that's looking to find a home. And you have these blue chips who need to differentiate themselves from each other. And the only way to do that in a snap is to consolidate. Because as we discussed before, the other thing is to get into advanced exploration or early exploration and grow that pipeline. But that pipeline you're going to see 10 or 15 years from now. You're not really going to see it soon enough for you to get value for your share price.
Yeah, no, I think there comes a point where you're so big that the only thing you can do is to tap your friend, your peer, also big, who's also big, and just say, hey, should we just get together and see what we can do? Yeah, I think that's the route that there's for listeners. If I think you can sort of place your players in different buckets. So not only in terms of size, which you can have sort of mid companies in the mid, $100, $200, $300 million who are producing. So you can have those. But when you go to the 1 billion up, those are in another league, and it's like they're talking amongst themselves, and I think there could be a lot of other conversations that because this was kind of like, there was no this rumors. I hadn't heard anything. I'm sure people had, but like I hadn't heard anything.
But where else were they supposed to go, right? I mean, if you're something like Allkem, I mean, and you're looking to grow, you can't really grow in Chile unless you buy out SQM or Albemarle, right? Bolivia's out, unfortunately. So, you got to look at Argentina. So if you're going to look at Argentina, you're going to look at what's producing. And that Livent, right? And the fact that they have, U.S. operations, et cetera, gives it a better diversification. And then, there's the downstream, and you talk about the synergies and stuff like that, and you make a very good story. But, there aren't that many choices, right?
Yeah, it's a small market, still a small market.
Yeah, and I mean, if, SQM went through a period where they looked at Argentina, and they looked elsewhere, and they looked at Australia, and they've done stuff, but nothing compares to what they have in Atacama. And now they're under a lot of pressure to look outside of the Atacama, or put their head down and look at the Chilean government. And that's just going to have to be a decision, right? I mean, again, Bolivia is sitting on huge opportunity for lithium, and that's not going to get realized anytime soon. Okay, unfortunately, right? I mean, there's advances and stuff like that. Okay. I mean, but it's a government policy, right? Then, I think Brazil is losing a lot of opportunities just because of what's been happening over the last 10 years. I think Argentina, outside of lithium, I mean, Argentina has a lot of potential mid-sized lithium players, and you're probably going to start seeing consolidation there, and it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, but having that many juniors with that many lithium projects, it makes things a little bit difficult, right? I mean, because in Argentina, you have a lot of juniors with lithium projects that are, advancing. I mean, they've had drilling here and there. They've got a pilot plant here about to be built. This deal with direct extraction, lithium extraction, and stuff like that. In Chile, you've got several juniors, but not that many. And as we discussed before, not that many projects. And in Bolivia, you've got nothing. And that's the famous triangle, right?
Yeah.
Where else do you go? You start looking at the US, and basically anything that moves and can potentially have lithium is being marketed right now, right? But if you talk about, copper, Argentina still has a lot of copper to be done there, right? In terms of advanced projects, mid-sized projects, large projects, I mean, that there's still a lot to be done there. And I would say that, for all the problems that Argentina has had politically, socially, economically, I still think Argentina is going to trump Congo any time of the day, except for the grade, right? I mean, the copper grade in the Congo is the copper grade in the Congo. I mean, and that makes people gravitate towards that. But again, when you talk about investors, when you talk about what the big guys are going to do, they're going to have to be making tough decisions. Whether it's to go ahead and invest $3-4 billion in Peru and not really know the uncertainties of what's going to come, or going to Argentina and know that there's uncertainty, but that people have navigated it for a while, and it's going to advance. I mean, it's about choices, and I think it's going to be an interesting year. I think there's still a lot to be done. Obviously, I mean, we love to talk about the majors and the deals that they're doing, but your expertise and my expertise is more in the mid-sized, and I think there's going to be some very interesting things. And if you get creative, I think mid-sized companies, small-sized companies, projects, can be fairly creative and really position themselves to dress themselves up to be taken over and create a new mid-tier copper, for example, range, because what used to be mid-tier is now sort of above mid-tier, not top tier, but I mean there's a different range. The mid-tiers are now billion-dollar companies. Where are the 150 to $500 million companies? There's not, and yet there's huge opportunities to do that.
No, I think it's an interesting opportunity that is opening up, and I think I'd like to see more. We've talked about this before. We've see more of those intermediate players to get into production, even if it's small production, because I think this industry has been so reliant on financing exploration, and it feels like it's something. This is another, we could talk, this could be another topic, like, is this industry sustainable? Because it's not. Hundreds and thousands of companies without an income, it's ridiculous. But I think we can talk about that in depth in one episode. That would be a fun one. We can get everyone to hate us.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I think we would like, I think the sort of to start closing up, I think this year we're gonna see a lot more deals, a lot more consolidation. I think we're gonna see a lot more failed bids because everyone's sitting on a good asset and with a path to production. They're gonna say, I don't have to take your money. I have my own process. Thank you very much. And we've seen that already a couple of times. So I think definitely it's going to be an interesting year. I think everybody's going to be busy, which is good. And I think that I tend to say this to a lot of people, and I think you sent me a document that we may cover in a future episode with a few of Argentina's top 10 opportunities. I think there's some really good assets there that should get developed, and as things are evolving over there, you still have the uncertainty, but if you know what you're doing, if you have good local partners, if you understand, which is true of any jurisdiction, I believe. If you can operate in Congo, you can operate in Chile, you can operate in Argentina, you can operate in all of us. So you have to know how, basically. So
yeah, no, and I mean, it would be great if those who have listened to our I don't know 45 minutes so far. I mean, if they want to hear about a specific country or a specific range or a specific commodity, let us know, and we'll be happy to
let us know in the comments. Yeah, would love to take your. We had some.
We'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, we had some great comments in the last episode of we still have to look in more depth, but yeah, let us know any comments or questions, and we'd be happy to cover them in a future episode. And yeah, keep this going. It's good fun, and I think we like having the possibility of adding some thoughts into the process, and yeah, it's always fun to chat to you.
Me too. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right, perfect. Thank you, everybody. Thank you if you're still listening. Thank you for staying until the end with us, and see you in 2 weeks, as Lucha said. Hear from you in the comments below. Lucho and I will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, here's another related episode you may like to watch next. Bye!